Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Florida Friendly Landscaping Professional Webinar Series. I'm really happy to be here today. My name is Claire Lewis. I'm the director of the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program. Today's webinar is Palms of Florida with our very own Stephen Brown. So we're really excited to learn a lot about palms and how to take care of them. One thing to note, your microphones have been muted. And we will be closing the chat box a little later, but right now I would love you to put in where you're from. And if you have a favorite palm, you could go ahead and put that in the chat box. Once we get started, we're going to move to the Q&A box to answer any questions that you have. So make sure you put that in the Q&A box. And just so you know, this webinar is approved for one CEU from FFLCP, LIAF, FDAX, DBPR for landscape architects, FNGLA, and also ISA. So you can have a CEU for any of those if you would like that. There is a $15 administration fee to receive the Certificate of Continuing Education. And I'll go ahead and put a link in the chat box in case you would like to register if you haven't done so already. Otherwise, the webinars, as always, are completely free, and we hope that you will enjoy them. This is a part of a monthly webinar series that we hold on the second Tuesday of the month at 10 o'clock. And next month, on December 10th, is Common Landscape Design Problems and Easy Solutions. And that will be brought to you by me. I'll be talking about those things, and I hope you will join us next month for that. Also, one last thing, at the end of this webinar, you'll see a survey pop up. Please take the time to fill that survey out because it really helps us with our educational programming. I love seeing everybody across the state chiming in here, and I'm seeing fans of Stephen Brown, which we're all big Stephen Brown fans. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Tom and have him introduce today's speaker.
Claire, thank you so much. It is my pleasure to be able to introduce our speaker today is Stephen Brown. Stephen, I've known Stephen for a long time. He and I actually went through new agent training. I hate to say how many years ago, but back somewhere around 31 years ago. So Stephen and I have been in Florida a long time. He is a longtime IFAS Extension Horticultural educator down in Lee County. He has over 35 years of extension experience and is known throughout Florida for his vast plant knowledge. Currently, Stephen works with the commercial plant producers, but everybody knows him because of all the publications that he has authored and his extension videos that he's produced and also starred in. He's one of those plant geeks. I say that in a very affectionate manner, Stephen, I consider that to be a big plus. There's not enough of us out there anymore. So today, Stephen's going to discuss the best palms for Florida, and he's going to share that vast bit of knowledge that he has with us. So with that, I'll turn it over to Stephen Brown and let you take it away.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate being here. I also appreciate everyone who's attending today's webinar. So let's get started. We're going to do today best palms for Florida. I have a lot of slides, so I may be rushing a little bit in some areas, but hopefully we'll get most of it. So here's a statement from the University of Florida. This is the equal employment or the affirmative action statement. And one thing that I think we should start out with, when you select a palm for the best palm in your area, foremost on your mind should be, is this palm adapted to where I live climatically? So I have here the climatic zone, USDA, for South, Central, and Northern Florida. And what you should realize is that for the most part, palms that are capable of growing in the warmer zone, which would be 10B, 10A, are quite often not adapted to the much colder zone, which would be Northern Florida, and vice versa. many, not all, palms that are adapted to a colder area are not well adapted to the warmer area. So keep that in mind as you select. Now, one thing I'm going to be doing, and I made this up, I have created a scorecard for the best palms. This is the rating. And I'm looked at cold tolerance. Remember, we just said that's really critical. Drought tolerance. I've also put in native or non-native. The best scores out of any of these categories will be 3. In the case of the origin, if it's native, I give it 3 points. If it's not native but not invasive, I give it 2. And if it is not native but invasive, we do 1. Nutritional requirement, 3. I'm going to do a little bit of pest tolerance, mostly insects and disease. We're going to look at the petiole because some of you might want to not choose palms that are what we call arm. They have teeth and spine. Salt tolerance is important. Salt tolerance is also important, and that's a little bit dubious in many cases. Something that we need also to look at, there's more and more of this. We're going to look at surge tolerance and wind tolerance, and these two primarily come with hurricanes. The maximum points out of all of these are 30. One thing things that I did not include in this is growth rate. You need to consider that. Is it self-cleaning or not? Are these clumpers or not? And really important, I didn't include this, maintenance. Because some of you might love a palm, but it's just too messy and it's just too hard to take care of. So let's look at the first palm, and we're going to go through the Florida native palms first. I think I have about 7 or 8 of these palms. The first one we want to look at is the cabbage palm or a sable palmetto, and it grows in many different situations. That's because the soil that it grows in is very wide. So we're looking at a shoreline, we're looking at HOA, and in a parking lot where the alkalinity or the pH is pretty high. These palms, the cabbage, are used as specimen, meaning they stand alone, framing to both sides, background, skyline. They're commonly used in roadways and in group planting. So this is our native cabbage palm, also the state tree of Florida and South Carolina. So looking at this, here are some of the problems. And for most of these palms, I'm going to give you some of the problems you may want to consider before choosing. It does get Ganoderma. You can see a Ganoderma clump there, and the palm is leaning because the Ganoderma is in full progression. And it does get lethal bronzing. Gotta warn you about that. So when you're choosing palms, think about these things. What can go wrong? But it is very hurricane resistant. And you can see right there after Ian, the surge came in, and then the wind came in, Category 4, full force, and these palms along this coastline in Sanibel were still standing, no problem. But you can see the surge rotted away or moved away the soil that was surrounding those roots that are now exposed. So this palm is a native. It grows in swamps, hammocks, prairie, and it's all throughout the state. They vary in their persistence of leaf base. So you can see the palm on the left has leaf base, palm on the right doesn't. This is a genetic factor. And sometimes people choose a palm according to their, if it has leaf base attached or not. Mostly in commercial, you get them without the leaf base. So it is a good palm. Here is the score that I've given this. Cold tolerance, zone 8 through 11. You notice I give it drought. The only thing that I dropped the score was wind tolerance. And I've seen many hurricanes since I've been here. And in many cases, it is a good palm for wind tolerance, but it is not the best palm for wind tolerance. So I gave it a 29. You will notice that for problems like insect and disease, although we do have the disease that I've outlined, they're not frequent for you to negate sufficiently this palm. These are infrequent problems. So let's look at number 2 as far as native is concerned. This is the dwarf palmetto, sable minor. It doesn't grow that tall, 4 to 6 feet. It's a slow grower. It has a very, it is essentially trunkless. And you can see it is grown mostly as an accent in the landscape as well as a ground cover and in parking lot. And the picture on the right is a causeway, is an approach to a causeway to Marco Island. So this is actually a very salt tolerant palm. What can, and here are some features. It grows to be, the leaf is about 2 to 3 feet wide, really good looking leaf. And you can see there are 2 inflorescent coming straight out of the ground. So part of the trunk is buried under the ground. 5-year-old palm. This is the one right in the middle. Some of the leaves have been pruned away to expose they're not really trunk and they don't get much bigger than that. It does have a problem, and quite often some of these native palm has this kind of whitish sooty mold problem. However, this basically only happens in the shade. And if you put it in the sun, it doesn't get that problem. But even in the shade, it is very uncommon. So this is a trunk-like species, very hardy. It's tolerant of drought, salt, shade. It can be used as an understory, and it is adapted to a wild host of soil. So here it is again. This is beside a park, beside a bench. Cold tolerance, look at zone 7. That's even out of Florida and further north. Nutritional requirement, I gave it a 1. Looking at all the literature and everything else. Disease problem is a 2. Petiole, it's unarmed, so I gave it a 3 because it's an arm. And let me go back over petiole. If I think I may have done it, but just in case, if the petiole is unarmed, I gave it a maximum score. And if it is armed, I gave it either a 2 or a 1. Salt tolerance, you can see a 2. Surge, if I put an asterisk beside a number, I'm unsure. So instead of giving it a 3 or a 1, I just go in the middle and I give it a 2 because I'm trying to develop this score sheet. So for this palm, dwarf palmetto, it's a beautiful palm. It's a tough palm, and I've known some of them for many years. So I would say, even if it's 24, it's still one of the best Florida palm for your area if it's adaptable. Here is a good palm. This is a salt palmetto, and it comes in 2 forms, either the green or the silver form. And commonly now what you see planted is the silver leaf form. It is an excellent palm. It's used in landscape as specimen, ground cover, coastal area, and wildlife habitat. And believe me, I've seen this palm growing in all kinds of situations, inland and right on the coast. And what are some of the couple of negative, if you want to call it that? The petioles have a very fine teeth, as they call them. And you can see them here. So if you were to try to cut off some of these to maybe make it more manicure or ornamental looking, you have to be careful of those teeth. And here is some close-up. And the fruits are really ornamental, I thought, and they're used quite often for in a particular kind of medication, and they're collected annually by many people. Now, this palm can get a little bit crowded. So here's a parking lot in Charlotte County where they kind of raise all of the salt palmetto. The good thing about this is, since the much of the stem or trunk is on the ground, all of this will come back minus the stem that's cut above the ground. So it will produce new growth from underground, and it will replenish this area fairly quickly. It doesn't transplant well, and if you do transplant it, just let's say it's tough. So most of this, you can get this. So this is really should be done from a pot. So it's great for naturalized landscape. And another thing about this is when it does flower, the bees love it. So if you want to help the bees, this is a good palm. So salt palmetto is an excellent palm. Here you see it growing on the coast, on the east coast of Florida, and it is well adapted to seaside experience. Cold tolerance is pretty good. The only thing I deducted it for was because of the teeth that appear on the petioles. Salt tolerant, of course, it's excellent. Surge tolerant, wind tolerance. I've seen this palm time and time again, goes through hurricane and surge, and it's covered in sediment, and this thing still comes back. So the saw palmetto score sheet, I gave it a 29. You can't be perfect. This is almost perfect. Here is another native. This one is called the Buccaneer palm. You can see it growing in a roadway. It's in a public area. It's in like an apartment complex as a specimen, and it's in somebody's garden in a mixed garden. And look how beautiful it looks. So you can use it in a bunch, in a variety of ways. Now, this particular palm has a really interesting trunk. You can see the leaf scars right there that circumvent the trunk. So when you choose palms too, look at the trunk. Is that the color trunk you want? Because some of these ring scars are very ornamental in their appearance. You might want to choose a palm partly because of that. And it has a short blue-green crown shaft, but it does have pest problem, and I've seen this time and time again. And likely it has disease problem. In this particular case, I didn't open up this palm, but I think this case are palmetto weevils. And it also have on the leaflets mealybugs problem, and that can be something that you don't want. So it's native to the Florida Key and the Caribbean. It's a durable, it's good for seaside. I've seen it resist surges, but in this case and this particular palm, no two palms look exactly alike because their trunk and the bulging on the trunk tends to be very variable. But it is a good palm. But what did I score it? Look, it's really limited to South Florida. So I had to give it a 1, because if you're in Central and Northern Florida, you probably shouldn't be planting this. Drought tolerance, very drought tolerance. It can grow on the beaches, more or less. Origin, I gave it a 3 because it is native. Nutritionally, it's good. But look, problem, it can have problem with diseases and with insect. Petioles are good, and everything else, I gave it a 3, maximum score. Total score for this, 26. Let's go to another native. This one is another real tropical one. The origin is in the Keys, Florida Keys, and the Caribbean. Now, this is a solitary palm. It's not a clumping palm. Growth is slow, and it'll get to be about 20 feet. But these two palms on the right, they're more or less 25 feet, so they've outgrown the typical height, and they're about, I don't know, 30 years or 40 years or so. It's great to frame. It's great in containers. It's good for small garden because the expanse is not wide, and even when it's small, this is what you got to sometimes consider. When a palm is small, they may actually occupy more room because of the canopy is close to the ground, and you gotta walk around them. So when you're choosing palm, choose it, again, cold tolerance or heat tolerance. Choose it for how big it gets, how fast it grows. For maintenance as well, consider maintenance. And consider the pest problem, obviously. So let's look at the score sheet for Florida thatch. Well, spoke a little too soon, but let's look at some of the beauty. So it is a palmate palm with circular leaf, and the fruits are ornamental. So this thatch palm, Thrynax radiata, it has ornamental white mature fruits, and they're spectacular. It does have a shaggy material at the top, and to me, that's good. It's not all over the place. It's held close to the trunk. and it's not, you don't have to remove it. One thing I want to tell you about this palm, and lots of palm as they age, but this one in particular, the very base of palms that may be 15 years or older tend to have this exposed roots, these adventitious roots. And that's what we see. Basically, all of these Florida thatch palm have those exposed roots. So they're easily hidden, mulch or whatever, but why hide them? It's what the palm does. So practically carefree, it's an excellent seaside. It's best in full sun. This is your Florida thatch. Consider this if you're in that area. Here's a relative of the Florida thatch. This is the Florida thatch palm score sheet. And when we add it up, it's 27 point. Surge tolerance is not as what I would have thought. I've seen this. It doesn't hold up well to the heaviest of the surge, but surge are heavy. I mean, I don't think much can hold up to some of these 11 feet of surges that we've seen over the last few years. Wind tolerance is excellent. Here is a relative of that. This is the key thatch palm. This one is recognized by the silvery underside of the leaf. It's used for coastal background containers. You can see it in a HOA roadway right there. It's excellent for group planting and light to moderate shade. It does tolerate. So let's look at some of its features. As I've said, the back of the leaf is shiny and you see it glistening in the sun. Now, it depends on what palm you get because some are more shiny than the others. Again, near to the leaf, there is a splitting of the leaf base, and the fiber that is there tends to be persistent. And I wanted to show you this right here. This palm grows excellent on really calcareous or high pH soil. Here you see it in an area that was burnt in a pine land forest, and these palms will come back. The thing about it is, these palms grew in this area naturally, but if you had a soil like this and you were trying to get it to grow, you would have to get a really baby palm, stick it in the right place for it to do well. But these palm, and you can see through these palm, and in the background, you can see other palms. So it's a tough palm and perfectly adaptable to calcareous limestone outcrops. And here you see it in a natural area there. I had to give the cold tolerance 1, of course. Drought is very high. Wind tolerance, I put it at 2, and the total score, 27 points for the key thatch palm. But it is a beautiful palm for HOA, for roadway median. It is something, if you're in this part of Florida where I am, it's commonly planted in those areas. Now, this palm will take cold. This is the needle palm, originated in Florida and beyond, further north, slow growth rate. It is essentially trunkless, and it grows to be about 5 feet high. And it does take shade or full sun. You could put it in containers. So let's look at some of the features right here. It has palmate leaf, and typical height is about 5 feet. Are you looking at the trunk right there? You see that trunk? Look at all those spiny looking things. But actually there is no trunk, but a short crown. You can see the leaves coming out of that area right there. So here they are. There is no trunk, but a short crown. This is more or less the material that comes off the trunk itself, and it looks kind of needle-like. You see it in my hand. The petiole is about 2 feet long and finely serrated, very finely serrated. But I had to give it, I think, a 2 right there. So usually found in understory of hardwood. It is a small palm, but it can grow in full sun. It is one of the hardier palm because it does take well to cold weather. and there is no trunk, and the old leaf bases are form a very short crown, and it is no more, usually less than 5-6 feet tall. So here it is in St. Augustine right there, and cold tolerance is good. Drought tolerance is excellent. Origin, yep, it's good native. It even grows fairly well down here in South Florida. Nutritional requirement, I put it at 2, and including the problems. But you know, it doesn't have much of that, but I want to be conservative in my rating. Petioles are 2, and I am not sure about surge and wind tolerance, so I went in the middle and gave it a 2 for both categories for a final score of 24. Now the next native is this one here. This is a clumper, Hesperodus palm, sometimes known as Everglades palm. It is widely planted, and we see it in a commercial setting. In the middle, this is residential. It is back, it is in the forefront of a house, and the palm to my right is in a roadway. You can see another clump. So every time we look at a clump, we're looking at a single palm. Now, even if you cleared out the clump and you didn't want it to look like the one in the roadway, immediately and always there's small suckers or stems are coming up, and the maintenance may be somewhat kind of more than you like in order to expose the canes, because the canes or the stem are very ornamental. So typically, this will grow to be about 20 feet tall, naturalized areas, wet areas. And let's look at what's going on here. The leaf are palmate, the trunk is slender, and is covered in these fibers. You can see what's going on there and what's going on here. And even when you remove some of the leaves, you can still see the fiber, which is basically very persistent. And as you notice with the picture on the right and in the center, you can see that the petioles are armed with marginal teeth, as they call them, right on the petiole. And it does, the biggest problem I've seen with this, and I've looked and looked and looked, and 80% of the time I believe I'm right. If you see this palm growing in a roadway and it's declining, chances are it has the disease Ganoderma, as is the palm clump on the right. So it does get that problem. And this is the biggest problem disease-wise that I know of this palm. So Ganoderma is naturally occurring in Florida. Remember, this is a palm disease. And once that palm get it, we do not recommend replanting with another palm in that same area or spot. So the Hesperodus palm, also known as Florida Everglades, it does take well to poorly drained soil. It will in time form a large cluster that restrict its uses to site where the spread will not be a problem. So if you're lazy, I shouldn't say that, but if you are not going to do much maintenance, it can get pretty big. So here it is. This is, my goodness, look what I did to this. I gave cold tolerance a 2. This goes up to Central Florida. I put problem with insects and diseases, number 1, because where I've seen it growing in roadway median, half of them are dying as far as I see. Spine, I gave it 2. Surge tolerance, I've seen this. It doesn't do well. Wind tolerance, it doesn't do well. Even though it's a native, I gotta be truthful, it got 18 for me. And I think this is my last native. This is the royal palm, beautiful palm. It's you can see it's how statuette it is. Origin is South Florida and Cuba. Growth rate is moderate, and it grows up to about 70 feet. And it's used as framing in large building, edge of doorways, and in my opinion, it's not for most residential areas. And here is an example. Here you see, this is the same location, several about 9 years apart. And you look at the picture on the left, and what do you see? These were just planted several months ago, and I decided, let me track this over the years. So a week or so ago, I took another picture and take a look at that. Now, it's beautiful, but what could go wrong? You see those palms? Well, lightning is a problem. Another problem is when you have a very strong hurricane, these are heavy wooded palm. And if they fall on your roof, it's more than you would want. If you park your car under there, what can happen? You'll be surprised. Also, this is a self-cleaning palm, and the leaves are like 10, 11, 12 feet long, believe me, and they are heavy. So even to clean up when the leaves fall, you don't have to prune them, they're going to fall anyway. It's just work. And here's another situation I want you to look at right here. This is after September 2022, after Ian, and you can see in Fort Myers how badly damaged these palms are. These are, of course, the Royals, but they do recover quite fast. This is a couple of years later, the same exact spot. As a matter of fact, if I was there a year earlier, September 2023, these palms more or less would have fully recovered. So it is a good palm, but if you're gonna think of planting it around your house or near a place where if it falls, it could land and hurts your property, think twice. It's very heavy wood. So this is the Royal, and this is how I scored it. This is it. Cold tolerance, it's 1. Drought, it's 2. Now, origin, it's native to the very south of Florida, but nevertheless, I gave it a 3 because it is native. Nutritional requirement, not good, because this palm, half of them, well, I shouldn't say half, but many of them have potassium deficiency, many of them, and they also have manganese deficiency. Lightning is a problem for this, as well as some insects. Petiole, it is good. There are no spines or teeth. Salt and salt tolerance. And the reason I gave it 2 for salt tolerance is simply because for many palms, you have to fertilize it in order to avoid the potassium and the manganese deficiency. And as you can see, I gave it a 2 for wind tolerance, and that's from the previous slide as the example, but it doesn't mean it's going to die when it gets hit that badly. Most of them recover, but it's not, the leaves tend to break when there is a heavy storm. And even if the storm is not that heavy, you can come out one day and you can see limbs hanging down. They haven't broken off, but the wind may have fractured the base of the leaf. Okay, we're done with the native palms. So let's go ahead with some other palm. Here is a Washingtonian palm. This one originated in Mexico. Typically, it can grow up to 100 feet. It has no crown shaft. It's used in a variety of ways. Background avenues and park, and even close to tall building. The thing about this palm is, as it gets older and older, it does the shag that is associated with the younger palms, as on the left, they call this the petticoat, disappear, and it becomes self-cleaning at that point. But you know what? Even though you can get a palm 50, 60 feet up in the air and it's self-cleaning, I still see people cleaning or companies having these palms clean. It doesn't even make sense. So let's go through some of the features. The Washington palm, it is armed with sharp teeth, okay? So be careful. Environmental problem, it's prone to lightning strikes. And disease is prone to Leviopsis trunk rot, as you can see right there. And it does get lethal bronzing. So it is a slender palm, and they're frequently cleaned by trimmers and I don't think they need to be when they get a particular age because they become self-cleaning. How did I score this guy? Cold tolerance, number 3. You can grow it up north. You can grow it in the panhandle. Drought is 3. Remember, it's from northern Mexico. Pretty drought, pretty dry area there. Origin is 2 because it's not known to be invasive. Nutritional is 2, and it does have all of this lightning and disease problem and insect problem. Petiole is a 1. It's arm. Salt is 2. Soil tolerance is 3. Surge and wind tolerance, you see my list in there, for a total of 20 points. 20 points. Here is another phoenix palm. So I have about 5 or 6 phoenix palm that I want to show you, including the second one here, Canariensis from the Canary Island. And you can see the younger palm, an older palm, 2 older palms to the right. And they usually, often in the old days, the younger palm looked like a pineapple, so it is sometimes called the pineapple palm. The palm in the middle, it's close to a residential spot, so is the one on the right, and it has this shag of hair below it that's just hiding the trunk, and if you remove it, you will expose the trunk. And you can see in the palm in the middle, you can see that it was recently pruned. Look up top, you see the exposed severed leaf bases. So it can go up to 20 feet. It's used as a specimen, avenues and park, but it may be too large for the average home. The petiole is armed with vicious spines, believe me. And nutritional deficiency. Many of these palms have magnesium deficiency. You can see the lower leaves here being affected by that. And it does get Ganoderma butt rot. It also gets palmetto weevil, which is pretty common for this palm as well. So magnesium deficiency, palmetto, fall smut, which is a fungal disease that affects the older leaves. And there is an insect that loves to eat the leaflets, and we call those leaf skeletonizers. So here you see several palms. I took this in 2007, and let's look how it progressed in growth. This is 17 years later. That's the same site, so that's what you have to prepare for. And you can see that it's grown along the roadway right here, but it's really beautiful there and here. So make sure you have lots of room for this palm to grow. One of these palms was taken out because of Ganoderma butt rot. And this is how I've listed it. Cold tolerance is 2. Nutritional is 1 because of that magnesium deficiency and also a little bit of potassium. It does have insects and disease problem. Petiole is vicious. Salt tolerance is 2. Salt tolerance, because it does develop magnesium deficiency quite often, I gave it a 1. Surge 2, wind 2, total points 18. But look, this is just my score. You may want this palm. This may be your best palm for your situation because you want a very showy palm that will stand out and that will attract visitors. And this one will. Very nice palm, but I had to tell the truth and I gave it an 18. Now, my score sheet is subject to review and subject to adjustment. And actually something I just thought of in the last couple of weeks as I was putting this presentation together. So here is the date palm, Daclifera, and you see this palm planted very commonly. It is the true date palm of the Bible. It has no crown shaft, so it's not self-cleaning. And if you don't clean it, typically what happens, look at the palm on the right, you see that the lower leaves are burdened down by the production of fruits. So quite often that's what happened. There's a separation of the canopy because the lower older leaves are weighed down by fruits. But it is used all over the place. HOAs, you see it in a commercial setting, and it is in many places of Florida. It is a good palm for roadway, for avenues, and for median. Now, it can sucker, but that can be controlled. So think about that when you plant it. Just keep an eye on that. And once you clean away the sucker, they rarely reappear. They have a hard time coming back. The petiole is armed with these vicious spines, and I'm not being dramatic. They're vicious. It does get a disease called false smut on the lower leaves, and it is subject to lethal bronzing. So this is the edible, it's the true palm. It is not great for humid climate as far as fruit production. So even if you grew this here in South Florida, it's really not going to produce edible dates for you. So it is a good palm. It does do a little bit of suckering at times, but that can easily be removed. And it is a beautiful shaped palm. It is commonly planted. So here you see it there. That's in Daytona Beach. Cold tolerance is 3. Drought is 3. And it is not native, but it's not invasive. So it gets a 2. Nutritional is 2. And problem, disease, and lightning, I had to give it a 1. Petioles is really well armed. Surge is 2. I've seen it perform near the beaches with surge. And wind tolerance is 1. Final score of 21. And remember, even though I gave it a 21 for the situation on the left right there, that might be the perfect palm in a situation like that. See how it just pops that commercial setting. It makes it really look nice. And here's another Phoenix, reclinada. This is the clustering one, and I wouldn't really recommend this. This guy, to me, it's full of problem, but I had to say it anyway. But if you wanted to keep it clean, look at those stems. Takes a lot of work, and typical height, 25 to 30 feet, and vicious spine, and it gets Ganoderma, and maintenance is high. And what did I give it? I gave it a 17 because it's not that well cold tolerant. And by the way, this is one of the palms. There are very few palms that are invasive. This is invasive. I see it in many places in South Florida, in some natural areas, and just growing somewhere by itself, and nobody is planted. So it isn't invasive. So you probably shouldn't even be planting this one. So it gets a 17. And pygmy date, this is a good palm if you can tolerate some of the nutritional deficiency, which we'll see in a minute. It's Southeast Asia. It's a small palm. It grows slow. You see it usually planted in a group of 3 palms. So it's not a clustering palm. It's a solitary or single stem palm, but quite often it is planted in a small group of 3. It has no crown shaft, and the leaves will hang on. And quite often, to tidy it up, you have to remove the old leaf to make it presentable. So look how nice it looks here. This is in Fort Lauderdale, I believe. It's really nice looking. It's really not that hard to maintain, but make sure that it doesn't develop the nutritional deficiency. The spine is very vicious, and it does develop these dead mat at the upwards. It is not cold tolerant. So this is frost damage right there. I'm not even sure if these came back or not. And it does develop manganese deficiency, as you can see. It also developed potassium deficiency. So what's wrong with this one? It's beautiful. It may be, this is great in HOA, I will tell you that. But if you're going to do this palm, make sure you check it for that manganese deficiency is somewhat prevalent, and it will have potassium deficiency, which doesn't kill the palm. Manganese deficiency can kill this palm. But it is a nice palm. It is pygmy date palm. What's the score? It is Oh God, 17. I wanted to score this higher, but I had to be truthful. Okay, cold tolerance is 1. You saw what happened. Drought 2. Nutritional, I had to give it a 1 because that manganese can kill it. Problem with insects, I gave it a 2. Petiole is pretty vicious. Salt tolerant, I gave it a 1, but you know what? I may have to revise this and bump it up a little. But surge tolerance is excellent. So is wind tolerance. Very good. As a matter of fact, this palm is even better than the cabbage palm when it comes to wind and surge tolerance. Remember, we started out with the cabbage palm. It was number 1, also in many cases, very good with regards to surge tolerance. This one is even better. The pygmidate, in my observation, is as good or better for hurricane proof than even the cabbage palm. So for that reason, it is an excellent palm. So you may want to be selecting palm. Is it a good wind tolerance? Is it good surge tolerance? This one is. And this might be the last phoenix, but got to throw it in. If you look here, it's from India. This one is there's the Sylvester palm. It looks a lot like the date palm, but the crown or the leaf is the crown is much more fuller, much more dense. Typical height is about 40 feet tall, and like all phoenixes, it doesn't have a crown shaft, meaning the old leaves are going to be hanging around. And here you see it in several locations, in a roadway, at an entrance, an informal garden, and in somebody's residence. You see how thick the canopy is. It doesn't sucker, but it does have these vicious spines. It does get Ganoderma butt rot, and it does suffer from lethal bronzing. It is quite common in South Florida. Here we're looking at the fruits. Cold tolerance is good. It's a 3. Drought is a 3. Insect problem, I had to give it a 1. Petiole, vicious. Spines. Salt tolerance is a 2. Soil is a 3. Surge is a 2. And wind is a 2, for a total of 21 points. So we're done with the phoenixes. Now we're with this jelly palm, pindo palm. The fruits are edible. It is solitary. It's from central to southern Brazil, and you can see it in several situations there. It's used as a specimen, street, accent, residential. It's it even grows pretty well in South Florida as well. And we're looking up at the palm, but look at this right here. It's armed with these vicious spines on the margin. See that? And here is my colleague, Doug Claudwell, examining the spines. And you can look at that right there. Not good. And it can occasionally get this Pestalotia leaf spot, but it is a good palm. It's a hardy palm. It grows throughout Florida. It functions well in a lot of places. It only has to be, if you do clean it, don't forget the spine. So cold tolerance is a 2. Drought is a 2. Nutritional is a 2. I got to give it, the spines are pretty bad. So I gave it a 1 there. And I'm not sure about surge or wind tolerance. So what was the score? 21. Next one here is the Chinese fan palm. This is a pretty popular palm. If you don't prune it, what will happen is, you see the palm on the right? That's what happened. When I say prune it, I mean pruning off the leaves. Now, it's commonly planted as a ground cover. You can see it right there. That's because it's a very slow growing palm, but it will outgrow. If you plant it as a ground cover, it can outgrow that situation. It's good for group planting. And let's see right here, the trunk has a swollen trunk. It looks a lot like the cabbage palm in many cases. You see right there? You might think it's a cabbage palm, especially with the one in the middle, but it is not. It's got this swollen trunk. It's got this shag of leaves on the top right there, shag of matted persistent leaf base, and it is armed. Remember, our cabbage palm is not armed. So here it is, the situation. This is January of 2007 and July 2021. This is the group of the same palm. And about 3 years before, I think about 2004, this palm was really grown as a ground cover. So they were shorter, much shorter. And within several years, they have become basically a forest of Chinese fan palm. Now, I really don't think the picture on the right, I think it's a nice shady area, and the palms don't seem to be suffering from nutritional deficiency, but they will have to prune off the leaves to remove the dead ones. So it's a good one, and it can be used in light shade, and cold tolerance is 2, drought is 3, origin is not native, but it's not invasive, so let's give it a 2. Salt is 2, soil is 3, surge is 2. I haven't seen it perform, but I've on the surge circumstances, but I've definitely seen that it gets a 2 for wind tolerance. 21 points. This is a Chinese fan. Here's another Livistonia. This is a ribbon fan palm. Australia, slow to moderate. It gets up to be about 30 feet. It has no crown shaft. But you know what's really nice on this palm? It has this kind of blackened fruit when it produces fruit. It's good as a specimen. It's good in group planting, and it's good for framing. Now here it is right here with those fruits. They're very ornamental. And when they drop, they don't seem to do a lot of germination. Some palms, the fruits germinate quite readily. This one doesn't. So cold tolerance is 2. Origin is not native, but I gave it a 2 because it hasn't proven to be invasive yet. Nutritional is 2. Salt is 2. And it is 3 with regards to soil and tolerant and surge tolerant. I gave it a 2, not having seen it perform there in those areas, but definitely I've seen it perform a 2 when it comes to hurricane tolerance. So what do we have next? Let's see. We've got okay, here's a good one. This is Carande palm. Okay, and I've seen this one mostly in Central Florida, but I've seen it more and more in South Florida. So this one can be used on your lawn, generally away from foot traffic because it's got these horrendous spine, but look at it. It's really a pretty palm. It grows up to be about 30 to 40 feet tall, slow growing, and that's what you need. So the first one is in a residential. The second one is residential, and that's somebody's, and that's a close to the roadway, and there's a sidewalk right there, and someone has planted it, and it looks pretty good, except for those, well, if you like them, those spiny leaf bases. And let's take a closer look. On the leaf is silvery, and it's armed with these petiole. And if you remove the leaf base and you don't cut them short enough, you can still get these persistent teeth on the part of the petiole that's remaining. However, if you cut it down, the leaf base closer to the trunk, it looks like this, which is nice, isn't it? I think it's nice. So here it is right here. This is on a roadway. There is a green and a silver form, so to speak. It's green on both sides of the leaf. Cold tolerance is 2, and this is the green form. Route is 2. It's not invasive. Nutritionally, I think it's good. I don't think I've heard much as far as problems is concerned. Petiole, I got to give it a 1. You saw what was going on there. Soil tolerance, surge, and wind tolerance, I have no idea. So let's give it a 2 and put it in the middle for a total score of 22 points. So what do we have next? Let's see here. Oh, we got this one here. This is windmill palm. And right off, I can tell you right off that this is not a palm for South Florida. This is the windmill palm, origin China. I took these pictures in Gainesville, and there were some of these palm on the campus in Gainesville. And when I occasionally go to Gainesville, and I'm always checking out what has happened to palms or to any plants over a period of time. And they seem to be less common on the campus. So I don't know what that means, but it probably means that they didn't hold up well for whatever reason. So, but they're good looking palms. You can see that. Look at that, those leaves. They're nice looking palms. They do have a lot of a matted area on the trunk, which is good too. Cold tolerance is 1, drought is 2. It is 2 for origin. It's not invasive. Nutritional, I'm reading the literature here. They gave it, I think it's 1. And problems, I have to give it a 2. And as I said, it doesn't do well in South Florida. So this is not recommended down here. Salt tolerance is 2. Soil is 2. I have no idea what it does for surge or wind. But so I gave it a 2. And what do we have? Well, got 18. That's pretty low, considering, right? But anyway, it may work so well up in the panhandle that it's a 30. Okay. All right. So we have another palm coming up. What is it? Let's see here. Okay, it's the European fan palm. Look how beautiful it is. The cluster on the left, that came from Coral Gables down in South Florida. And look how beautiful it looks. This is on a residential. This is somebody's driveway along the driveway right there. It's really beautiful. Further north, you can see 1, 2, 3 of the European fan palm. Now, they look quite different. And that's because you can grow it as clusters or single palms. Beautiful palm as single or in cluster. And again, in cluster, there's more a maintenance thing if you got to go through that. So it's a great looking palm. So here are the leaves, very deeply divided, very ornamental looking, vicious teeth, and it does have insect problems. And not only palm aphids, but also scales. So this is a slow grower, and you can grow it in containers for years. It loves full sun or bright shade, but it is, and no 2 palms really look exactly alike. So what did I give the European fan? Cold tolerance is 3, drought is 3, and nutritional is 2. Problem with insect, lots of these palms, at least in South Florida, lots of the European fan palms have aphids, palm aphids, or scale problems. Petioles or arm, salt tolerance are 2. The soil, I gave it a 3, surge and wind. I'm just generous, gave them 2. So we got 21 points. Drought tolerance is high once it's established, 21 points. And what do we have next here? And we're almost done, so stick with me. We have this seashore palm, and you can see it's clustering right here, and dark leaves, and the fruit looks a lot like, almost like a cone shape. It's a great one for coastal, and it is native to the seashores of Brazil along the dunes there. It also does well inland. I gave the seashore palm a total of 27 points, so I was very generous. Drought tolerance is 3, wind is 2, surge is 2. I don't know nothing about that there, but I suspect it probably does well with surge, seeing that it grows on dunes. So I would think, so maybe that should be a 3, but I haven't experienced any effect of that, so let me go with 2. So here is the bottle palm, and this is a curious palm for South Florida, really. And look at the bulging trunk. So it is planted a lot. It can grow up to 12 feet, as you can see right there. and it is a very ornamental palm. It does well in containers as well. I've seen it growing in containers. It does have potassium deficiency. The crown shaft is beautiful. It does have rings on the, well, lots of palm have that. And this is typically what you get now for the leaves. The leaves, it has few leaves, they're V-shaped, but many leaves on this palms are potassium deficient. So it's cultivated for the unusual shape, potassium deficiency. What did I score it? I gave it a 22. Cold tolerance is shot if you want to grow it in central or northern Florida, but it does have good salt, soil, and surge tolerant. And this one, I have seen this palm that it has withstand surges, wind. So this is a great hurricane-proof palm. It does excellent under those conditions. But potassium deficiency is downfall. And here is its relative. This is the spindle palm. Looks really nice. 20 feet growth, slow growth rate. It is a solitary palm, and it's used in patio group planting. And by the way, some of you may want to plant some palms around pools. And I would think the spindle and the bottle palm that we've just saw are such palms that you may want to plant it along a pool area, because they're not much as far as cleaning up maintenance is concerned. So this one is hardier than the bottle palm, and you can see they're close relative. And I gave this a 22 maximum. I've seen it perform well in the case of wind and surge tolerant. Soil is good, so this is a good palm. And we're almost done. Christmas palm, otherwise known as the Adenidias, and these are solitary palm, normally planted as in groups of 3, like the pygmy date, but it's really a solitary. And on the right, we can see some of the older palms. So it's a great palm, small specimen. It's great for small areas. It is self-cleaning. And here you see that it's part of the decoration, so to speak, of a building. And when you take a closer look, you can see what it looks like. Cold tolerance, it's 1. And it's good for surge, it's good for wind. Salt is good, and soil, it's good as well. So I gave this a 23. And finally, coconut palms. This is the palm of the tropics, so to speak, and moderate in growth, and typical height 50 to 80 feet. And you can see it has that really tropical look. And it's good for surge tolerance. This is after Hurricane Ian right there on Fort Myers Beach. And you can see all that went on, and the surge went back out. The roots are exposed, but these coconut palms, they still look relatively great. Not good with lightning. We do get a lot of lightning strike. And the thing about this palm, if there's a lightning strike with coconut in particular, and it's in a group of coconut palms, basically the entire group is going to be killed. And it does get a disease, or not a disease, an insect problem called the rugose spiraling whitefly. It's not as bad as it used to be, but it is still around. It also gets lethal yellowing and palm aphids. I gave it a 21 score, but wind tolerance is 2, even though surge tolerance is 3, because the leaves tend to break up during heavy hurricane. So let's look at the finals. Oh, I got one more. Old man palm, let's do it real quick. Growth is very slow, nice looking palm, and palmate leaf, and very shaggy, but it does lose its shag as it gets older. And it's a good looking palm, and you may want it to frame an entrance to an office or something. So with this one, it is not cold tolerant, so you got to give it a 1. Drought is 2, nutritional is 3, and I haven't seen it with any problems, so to speak. And it doesn't have any spine, and I have no idea what it performs on the surge and wind tolerance. 24 is the point. So in conclusion, this is what we have here. Cabbage and saw palmettos are the best performing palms throughout Florida. Including in the best, we have Florida thatch, and these are 3 native palms, but also in that group is seashore palm, which is not native. And if you go down the list, you can see right there, we have Buccaneer, which is native, dwarf palmetto, needle are natives, old man, we just saw, not native. Christmas palm is pretty good, but it does have some problem, and that is the list right there. And let me see here. This is me, Stephen H. Brown, and I want to invite everyone, if you have an Instagram account, join me today by going on Instagram at Lee_UF IFAS. And I try to put out at least 2 or 3 posts every week, maybe 1 if I feel lazy that week. So if you have any question, again, I want to thank each and every person for joining me today. I really appreciate it. And I am willing to answer any questions if you have them.
Stephen, thank you so much. That you covered a tremendous amount in that presentation. I found your grading system to be really interesting and pretty comprehensive. And so it's kind of fun to see a different take on how you graded the best palms for Florida. So I really liked that. I thought it was innovative and interesting. Got quite a few questions for you. First one is it true that the berries are edible on cabbage palms?
I haven't heard of the berries being edible on cabbage palm at all, but as you know, what's edible is the heart of that palm, which is the meristem where the new growth come out. And here in Southwest Florida, there is in La Belle every year there is a festival in which they cook the heart of the cabbage. Not only is the heart of cabbage palm edible, but there are other species of palm in which the heart of the palm is edible. Now, the berries may be edible. I don't know. That's research you might have to do for yourself.
I've not heard of that either, Stephen. So, if they are, it's news to me.
If they are, they're probably not very palatable. And by the way, I want to correct something. They're not berries because I'm a stickler on this. They're drupes in the sense that the fruits of palm have 1 seed in the middle, and if you have 1 seed as a fruit, you are a drupe, not a berry. And berries have they have several seed as part of the fruit. This only has 1, as in the case of peach and avocados and mangoes.
Well done. Helping to educate us. Can you tell the difference between a young cabbage palm and a dwarf palmetto?
Yeah, you can. It's really easy. A young cabbage palm, if they're not clustered, is a solitary. The dwarf palmetto tends to, it always stays short, and the leaf seems to be coming out of the ground. With a young cabbage palm, it could be the same height as the dwarf, but the leaves seem at that point to be coming out of a trunk. Also, with the dwarf palm, the fruits seem to be, or the inflorescence seems to be coming out of the ground instead of on the trunk. So that's a couple of ways in which to distinguish them.
Okay. Are you aware of any ordinances or prohibitions by any cities or counties where they're preventing the planting of certain palms due to disease problems?
Not disease, but now I haven't heard of disease at all, but I think that should be something to consider in the future, if not presently, because if you're in a HOA and you're planting some of the phoenix, such as the Sylvester palm or the date palm, and you get lethal bronzing, it's not nice. Okay, it's too costly. So that's something that should be considered. However, even though they, as a matter of course, many municipalities want there to be native palm planted in the development, not that any other are prohibited, but they usually encourage native palms almost to the exclusion of non-native. Now, in most residential area or private homes, at least in Lee County, you can plant whatever you want, but in many HOAs, there are regulations that would have you give preference to native palms.
Okay, awesome. Next one, this person has seen over many years of experience that pruning only dead fronds from cabbage palms isn't necessary, that she hasn't seen any problem, any ill effects of pruning more. I myself have seen issues with over pruning cabbage palms. What are your thoughts on that?
Okay, for one thing, over pruning is not necessary, okay? And with cabbage palms, it's not self-cleaning, so the older leaves will persist. But they just give the palm just a nice appearance, a 360 canopy, as opposed to a very narrow canopy. There are reasons that you may want to keep a full canopy. Number one, for me now, and I don't know why people are so adamant in pruning cabbage palm to nothing. Now, I can see why a commercial business would want a contract in doing it, but it's not necessary. So I think there's a big re-education campaign. I don't know if it's going to be successful in my lifetime, and I've been here over 30 years, and they're still pruning the hell out of cabbage palm. They call it hurricane cut, or hurricane cut it doesn't do, as a matter of fact, if you hurricane cut a cabbage palm, it does worse in a hurricane, not better. Okay, I've seen it time and time again. So keep the full thing on, and we recommend that you keep it on for nutritional, because the leaves that you may remove, they're functioning, they're doing photosynthesis. That's what they want to do. They want to build a strong palm. So I hope I've answered your question there. I prefer them with a full canopy, even though the bottom leaves may look a little ratty. So what?
Yeah, I'm kind of with you on that. Just there's a community I have to drive through to get to my community, and they were just pruning in the last week, and they way over pruned the cabbage palms, and I was hoping we'd be past that at this point in time.
We're not. And by the way, before I forget, while we still have some people here, I have a plan next year to do an online palm academy, in which I'll probably put up 5, 6, 7 modules. And it will probably be free for master gardeners to take it. So if you want to do it, consider it. Hopefully I can knock it out in the next 4 or 5 months. So consider that.
Wonderful. Those adventitious roots that you talked about that form at the base of some palms, have you found that those are reactionary to some sort of issue, whether it be, high water table, compacted soil, or other issue?
As a matter of fact, last week I took some master gardener around, and I was just showing them that practically almost every palm, I want you to notice this, as they age, as they get older, the bottom bark, and we call the barks of palm pseudo barks because they're not as strong as barks of hardwood trees. And as the palm ages, just about all of them in all species, the bark will begin to expand outwards. And as it expands outward, and it's expanding outwards because adventitious roots are developing under the barks expand, and it's in its expansion, it cannot stay together and it falls off. This is not caused by, and maybe a little over irrigation can stimulate it more, but it's almost a natural thing to palm, even in the desert. They will develop these adventitious roots. And if you don't cover them, they will die and look dry up and all of that stuff. But I don't think it's necessarily the soil is too compact or anything, because I've seen it all over on all species, and it's just a natural thing in many older palm species, many of them.
Awesome. Stephen, you didn't mention Areca palm. What are your thoughts on Arecas?
Because it's one of the worst palm to plant. Why would I mention it?
Thought you were going to say that.
No, I didn't mention it. You know why? Ganoderma, you get a strong wind and we've gone through 3 hurricanes or 4 in the last 3 years here in Southwest Florida. And that is a palm, even though it's a clustering palm, you get heavy winds and the whole thing's dead. I could have put it up and I was thinking about that, but the whole palm is dead. So it's not very tolerant when it comes to surges or hurricane. And Ganoderma is a constant problem. And also, the leaves, it's a self-cleaner, it's bunched up and the leaves keep dropping. And if you're a tidy person, it's a messy palm, okay? And it cannot grow your property because the canes can get 20, 30 feet tall. And eventually, even if you want it as a screen, it may be too big. And believe me, it's disease prone, Ganoderma. It's not good with surge or heavy or strong storm, and it's a messy palm. For those reasons, but if you like it, it could be your best palm. So don't let me stop you, please.
Very good. What about this person's had Ganoderma on some of their sable palms, and they want to protect the rest of the sable palms on the property? What would be your recommendations?
There's not much you can do about that, because once it gets the disease, you just take it out as quick as you can, the infected palm, and make sure that if you're doing any pruning, which I don't think you need to do for sable palms, that you prune with a clean tool, disinfected from one palm to the other. But since there's no cure for Ganoderma, we recommend you remove it as soon as you see any form of a clump that may be developing. And again, don't replant back in that same area, any type of palms.
That would be my exact recommendation. And yes, I think that's well said. Just remove it as soon as possible and plant something else other than a palm.
Other than a palm, yeah.
Yeah. It's an interesting question. Large palms that are self-cleaning. Would you recommend planting them a good distance away from structures and things to keep there from being damaged to falling fronds?
Well, it depends what palm it is. As I said, the royals, I don't think you should plant very close to a structure because the fronds are heavy. And the fronds, when I say they're 12 feet tall, the base of that palm, to me, can weigh like 20 pounds or something. It's heavy as hell. But you have a palm like Montgomery palm, which is much slender, much taller. I think that can be planted close to a building. It does get tall, so there's some with very narrow trunk that may be worth planting close to a building. However, with a palm like Montgomery, because I have some in my yard, you know what happens? It keeps putting out droops, and the droops fall and fall and fall. And my wife wants me to clean it up. So what do I say? So yeah, I think there's some tall palms can go close to a building. Now, you know what I recommend? If you're going to plant them close to a building, plant them very close. Because if they do fall on the building, they tend not to do as much damage. They just rest against the building in that case. If you plant them kind of 10, 15 feet out, then the mass of the trunk, the heavy part, will land right on the roof or right on the wall or something else. So if you're going to plant them close, plant them relatively close, like 4 or 5 feet away, and not 10, 15, 20 feet away, which the heavy trunk can really smash into your valuable property.
Okay. What about Bismarck palms? I see them planted a lot in the last 15 years or so.
Let me just say, I have the same problem with Bismarck as I do with the Arecas. Bismarck are no good with regards to hurricane or surge. It is the #1 palm that is most susceptible to wind damage. Okay,
Ah,
numero uno, and I've seen this year after year. Landscapers, homeowners, those are the reports. It's #1. It will die if you have very severe winds. So it's not hurricane tolerant. It's also not surge proof. Another thing too, it gets killed with palmetto weevils. Okay. Another thing, organoderma on this palm. And if it's the thing about it is when it gets hit by a strong wind or hurricane and the top is crooked or the top is bent, it can be infected with palmetto weevils and it develop nutritional deficiency because of the storm. And if it does recover, it takes too long, like 3 or 4 years to be fully recovered, that you probably don't want it hanging around for that long looking the way it does. But it's not a good palm. That's why I didn't bring it up. Now I know they have it in many areas and it looks great. But another thing too, it's a big palm. It's as big as the raw palm, and if that falls on your house, it's murder, or on your car. It's not a good thing. And again, as I said, it has Ganoderma and it has palmetto weevil. It's a good palm if you like it when it's young. Look at it when it's young. The fronds are so big and expansive that you need a lot of room when it's young to be able to display it and grow it comfortably.
awesome. That's great advice. Thank you so much. We've seen a number of questions come in about foxtail palm, another palm that's been planted a lot over the last 20 years.
I know. We have a lot of foxtail palm, and somebody said to me despairingly one time, why don't you recommend foxtail palm? Now, foxtail came in the last 20, 25 years or so, and it was touted as a replacement for the royal because it's smaller, grows a little faster, and should be easier to take care of. Now, what I found, again, if you like it, don't let me tell you not to plant what you like, but what I found, nutritionally, it's a problem, at least in my area, and it's a problem with Ganoderma, and those are the two big things. And also, it's not very tolerant of heavy wind. The leaves tend to break off, and so for those 3 reasons, particularly for disease problem, Ganoderma, excuse me, in particular disease, it's not, and fertilizer, it's not the greatest of palm, but it's a good looking palm. If you have one that is growing well, it does look great in the landscape. It is self-cleaning, and I like it. Formally, as an appearance, I think it's a great palm, but we're here to consider the best palm, not the most likable palm.
Yeah, it's got issues, and a lot of people have removed it from their recommended planting list just because of all those issues you bring up. So, have you seen phantasma scale on it?
I don't think I have. No, I haven't seen that on it.
Let's see. What about queen palm? Another one. Sorry.
I've seen queen palm perform well up in Central Florida. I said, man, they look better up there than they do here in South Florida. It used to be a very popular plant when I came in, but even then, they were knocking that palm, even then 30 years ago, because they were saying it's a dirty palm. They used to list palm as being dirty. And dirty means it drops a lot of the drupes, and the drupes just germinate onto the palm, and you have to clean it up, and the leaves hang. So they used to call it a dirty palm. It is still a dirty palm of course, that's not going to change with the dropping of the drupes and the germination. But the other issue that it does have is Ganoderma. It's another one. and also fertilization and also water. If you don't water it sufficiently and you don't give it the right type of fertilizer, the top look wizardy, it looks out of place, and you want to remove it. So it's not typically planted anymore down in South Florida. It has been replaced as a best palm.
The questions keep coming in, so I'm going to have to race through a few of these. Why are some palms more prone to lightning than others?
I don't know. I've been wondering that. I did a fact sheet edit, hopefully still up there, on lightning strikes on palm. And I think I kind of think maybe it's trying to think, I didn't speculate why, but I think maybe it's the flow of the vascular tissue, maybe one. I don't know, but I will tell you the palm that tends to be more lightning attracted. They are the Washingtonian, Royals, coconuts, the Bismarck, which I should have mentioned as being hit by lightning often. And those are the four big ones that are usually hit by lightning.
Fantastic. Stephen, thank you for hanging around, on overtime here, answering questions. Just so you can see Stephen's email address, if you have questions we weren't able to get to, please feel free to, email Stephen or check with your local county extension agent if you have additional questions. A number of people were asking how they can get a copy of this presentation. The presentation within 1 to 2 weeks will be uploaded to the Florida Friendly Landscaping webpage. We archive all of these webinars, so you can always access all of our past presentations there. And I'd like to remind you that our next webinar is scheduled for December 10th. That'll be with Claire Lewis, the director of the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program. And she'll be presenting common landscape design problems and easy solutions. Please remember to complete the evaluation that you're going to be given. That really helps us to really plan for the following year and coming years so that we get an idea of what you're interested in and the topics that are really important to you, because we want to make these webinars as pertinent to you as absolutely possible. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. Stephen, amazing. I think people are going to be talking about this presentation for quite some time. And I'd like to encourage everybody to join us again next month. Have a great day.
Thank you.